welcome to the seventh Lighthouse talk we organized by the Faculty of Graduate Studies, University of Moratuwa. So today our speaker, I will briefly introduce Professor Keshavan Niranjan before I give the stage to him. He started life in the academia with Department of Chemical Technology, University of Bombay in 1980. And then moved on to University of Cambridge Department of Chemical Engineering, where he was a postdoctoral research associate for many years. Where actually we became friends at that in that surrounding. From then on, he moved on to the Department of Food Science and Technology, University of Reading, UK, and today he is the Professor of Food Bioprocessing in the University of Reading, UK. And we had this discussion about this open access publishing, and he mentioned and very graciously said, look, I'm happy to present it. So that's why Niranjan took your offer, and very happy to invite you to be presented today as a Lighthouse speaker. A little bit more on what's relevance is also he has been the with the Food Industry Institutes very much subsequent to moving to Reading, and has Distinguished Service Awards, Lifetime Achievement Awards presented by the International Association of Engineering and Food, and also later on the Fellow of the Institute of Food Science and Technology, but later in the sense since about 2005. And with respect to this particular subject, he has enormous experience to discuss because he has been in the editorial board of scientific reports with Springer Nature, and then subject editor of, these are the two current ones, Food and Bioproducts Processing Journal of Institute of Chemical Engineers. And also before that, he has been with as the editor of the Journal of Food Engineering. So a couple of premier journals associated in the food field. So with that, I would like to invite, I must also mention, looking at the long CV, I happen to be, he had postdoctoral research associates, going back to the memory lane. I happen to be the second postdoctoral research associate when I moved into Reading with him. Well, he was as staff, and I have been the postdoctoral researcher. And computer simulation of the heat treatment of food, I know that. So still I see in the list, I'm the only Sri Lankan still been there. Over to you, Niranjan.
Thanks, Ajit. It's been great knowing you all these years, and that's been one of the joys of my life. Okay, so let me first of all share the screen, and just Ajit, please let me know that I'm okay. 1 minute. And let me know whether now can you see one slide only, or you can see my slide?
One slide
only one slide. Okay, that's great.
Go.
So fantastic. So okay, we are ready. Okay, so because my screen is different from the screen that you are seeing. Okay, so as Ajit rightly said, anyway, thanks Ajit for that generous introduction, and good evening to all of you. So the title of this talk is Open Access Research. I've just added for research publications because I'm mainly going to talk about publications, but I might also mention about open access books and other things. It is, I believe, an imperative. We are moving towards, it becoming an imperative right now. So in terms of the structure of this talk, I'll start with, the traditional publishing model, just one slide. Then I'll define what is open access, then look at some of the open access repositories we have. Then what are the benefits of open access to publishers, funders, sponsors? And then I'll briefly talk about open access at Reading. Then how does one pay for open access? That's also relatively brief because it changes from place to place. And then I'll mention about open access PhD thesis, because all universities now archive their PhD thesis open access, so that anyone anywhere in the world will be able to access and read the thesis. And I'll conclude this talk with talking about some of the recent trends in open access and some of the challenges that we face. Okay, so that will be the broad structure of the talk. So let me start with the traditional publishing model, and I've sort of loaded this slide a bit in the sense that I'm asking whether you have all faced frustration by paywalls, because the traditional publisher model is based on libraries or individuals or companies or whoever subscribing to the journal in order to access articles. So this model restricts access only to those who can pay and to read the contents. That's the first point. If research is hidden behind paywalls, I'm quite convinced that the pace of discovery will be considerably slow. At the same time, because of payment, we have unequal access for researchers. So people in low-income countries who really cannot afford to pay, whose universities or whose employers may not be able to afford to pay, they will have no access to articles which have been published and which have been in the public domain for many years. And this is totally unfair, and I have many arguments to prove that it is unfair to pay for reading a research paper. But one of the main reasons I believe is that, mind you, more than 90% of the research worldwide are funded by government. So when you have governments funding research, where does the government get money from? It gets money from the taxpayers. Now, can it be fair if the taxpayer who has sponsored your research will have to pay again to access your research outcomes? That is, in my view, a very, very strong argument for open access. There are many, many other reasons, but to me, this is the most important thing, that if taxpayers are paying for your research, why should they not have access to your research? Why should they have to go again pay or a subscription fee for a journal to read the paper for which their taxes have funded? So if you look at the government positions all over the world, in principle, now whether they are able to implement this policy or not is a different matter. But in most countries, if you ask a government what is their policy, they will generally be supportive of open access because of this reason. The other disadvantage of having paywalls is that you can't really, content cannot be easily data mined, and it can't be repurposed easily. That means use of that content is highly restricted when research is sort of hiding behind paywalls. So what is open access? By definition, it's free and unrestricted online access to publications for anyone who has an internet connection. In other words, you should have internet access. Yes, if you don't have internet access, then forget open access or subscription-based. None of these models will mean anything. But if you have an internet connection, a reasonable internet connection, then you should have free and unrestricted online access to publications anywhere in the world. And that's what open access aims to achieve. And what can you do through open access? Without paying a subscription fee, you should be able to search for a paper. You should be able to read a paper in the electronic form, not in a bound form, in an electronic form, and that's good enough. And then you should also be able to reuse the content, provided, now here again is a moral and an ethical principle, and that is, you will reuse the content provided the reuse is subject to proper attribution. You can't just download a paper written by somebody else and put your name and say it's your paper. That's clearly, unethical and probably illegal as well. So in open access, your papers or whatever you publish must be free. There should be no payment. And there is unrestricted online access to publications for anyone who has internet access anywhere in the world. So that's the main thing. Now, this open access is essentially a part of a of what is called open research. And open research has several characteristic features. For example, the protocols must be open. If you're following laboratory and other protocols, that should also be open. I mean, it's not just the final paper that should be open. We are looking for transparency throughout. And unless and until research is transparent, you cannot really make use of research properly. So open protocols, open materials. In other words, your notebooks, your lab book, where you have recorded the data and other things. So open materials, open data. Suppose you have developed a software for your research, that should also be open. And you will see that open access publication is only one part of open research. In fact, even peer review should be open. And here there are two ways, I mean, of looking at it. When I say open peer review, the review comments must be open. The question whether reviewer should remain anonymous or not, now I have no strong views on it. Personally, I have always told editors that I have no problems. If I am the reviewer, if my name is revealed, I have no problems. But that's a personal choice. Many people like to hide behind anonymity and would like to review papers. So if they like it that way, that's their choice. I have no problems with that. But clearly, the review itself, in my view, must be open. It doesn't matter who is the author of the review, but the review must be open. And in an ideal world, I also want the reviewer's name should be there, because what is there to hide? If you have reviewed a paper, you put your name and you stand by your comments. You must take ownership for the comments you make. And then lastly, educational resources, because there are many educational resources that come out of research, and they should also be open so that future generation students can also make use of it. So open research has several platforms and characteristics, and open access publication is just one, and that will be the main focus of the talk. I'm not going to talk about open research in general. So if you look at what are the different types of open access, I mean, you can publish in a journal or a book, which can be immediately made available. So if it is made immediately available, then it's what is called the gold open access. So in the gold open access, it will be the publisher's version of the paper that will be published open access. So it should be accessible as soon as it is accepted. Anybody, anywhere in the world with a internet connection should be able to access it. Then there is another open access. There are many types of open access, but I'm only going to talk about two today. Gold open access and then the green open access. In green open access, usually it is not the publisher's version that is published, but it is the author's accepted version of the manuscript. So when you submit a manuscript, it's reviewed and other things. So it goes through the peer review process, then you get the comments, then you make changes. And then, of course, after 1, 2, 3 revisions, depending on the extent of revisions that you are required to make, you come up with a version of the manuscript that is accepted, and it is that version. So it is not the printed, the publisher's version, but it is your version that is placed in a repository. And how soon is it accessible to others? Now, in green open access, it depends, because it depends on the repository and what agreement that we have with the publisher. So the publisher may impose an embargo. In fact, most publishers impose embargoes on papers which are not published open access, and that is because they also want to recover their money, because they have invested in article processing charges. So they want to recover their money. So what they do is to place an embargo. Normally that embargo is about 6 months or so. Sometimes it could be longer also. It depends on the subject, it depends on the journal, etc. So in green open access, it is open to all, it is open access. So it is open to all, or it becomes open to all after an embargo. Now, who enables open access? Well, in the case of gold open access, it's the publisher who enables the open access. In the case of repositories, then clearly, it's usually a self-archive repository, and there we enable open access. It's either the person who is responsible for the repository or authors themselves. Now, what does open access cost? Whether it be green, whether it be gold, whatever, it is free. There is no cost associated with it. Then comes the question, can it be reused? Now, reuse is again, it depends on the type of agreement, and there are various agreements, and I'll come to these CC agreements. CC means Creative Commons, and I'll come to that later on in the talk, but it depends on the agreement what kind of reuse you are allowed to do. For example, if you want to if you are writing a book chapter, you want to reproduce a figure or a table, whether that is allowed or not is something you have to check. The article may be allowed, you may have the figure in front of you, but whether you can take the same figure and put it in another article or not. Normally, publishers don't have any major issues with it, but please check the copyright agreement, and then only you will be able to reuse it. Very often, I have recently written a book, and I found it extremely. I thought this part would be relatively easy, but it took a long time for me to get permissions from various publishers to reproduce figures and tables. Not only that, many publishers were asking for payment as well. So that's an area where, again, we have to, even if a paper is published open access, whether you can reuse the content and in what form you can reuse the content, it depends on the agreement. So please make sure that you follow both legal as well as ethical requirements. Now, here are some of the open access sites. You can either have repositories which are open access, and I'm sure some of you, it depends on which subject area you're working. This one, archive.org, that is mainly for mathematics and physics and in those areas. PMC is actually the PubMed Central. It is an archive for obtaining full text of biomedical and life science articles. So these are general subject-based repositories, but there are also some variants of this archive, like bioarchive, and also that's for biological sciences. This is for physical science, and so on. So these are subject-based repositories. Then you have a general repository as well. Figshare is one, where Figshare is an online digital repository where researchers can preserve and share, the figures, the graphs, data sets, and other things. So it's, even the raw data can be put there and shared. But remember, these are not peer reviewed. Okay, it doesn't mean they are right. You can put it there, but it's for the person who uses it to be sufficiently discriminating and critical. You can't, just because something, I have always found this with students, just because something appears on some site, they are convinced that it is correct and accurate, and that is where I think we've got to warn. And this is a warning to all students, whether you are, and this should be done from your undergraduate days itself. When you read a material on internet, please note that it doesn't have to be true, and nobody checks the quality of that material unless it is a peer-reviewed publication where there is some quality check. I don't believe the quality check is very good, but regardless, there is some quality check in a peer-reviewed journal. But otherwise, anybody can blog anywhere, and it is for the end user to be discriminating and critical. So young students must start at a very young age to learn to be skeptical and not accept information, any information that is thrown at you. So please be critical. So that's as far as general repositories are concerned. We also have institutional repositories. Certainly in UK, most universities, to the best of my knowledge, have Centaur. In fact, I have to, when I publish a paper, as soon as my manuscript is accepted, I have to upload it on Centaur. And if it is not uploaded on Centaur, both the university as well as the research assessment framework will not recognize it as a publication at all. If it is not open access, it is not recognized as a publication now. So we are obliged to deposit all our publication, whether it be whether it be research publication, whether it be book, chapter, whatever, it's got to come on the institutional repository, and that is sent out. To the best of my knowledge, most UK universities have sent out. There are other alternatives as well. It's a repository after all. Then you also have sharing network sites. I am sure you are all familiar with sharing network sites. ResearchGate is quite popular. Academia.edu, that's popular. So and you probably may be members of these as well, where you may be sharing your articles on these sites as well. But please be very careful when you share articles on these sites. Check whether the publishers, if you are putting the publisher's version, then check whether you are allowed to put it there or not. If it is your own manuscript version, obviously that's fine. But if it is a published version, then you may have to check, and then only you put it. Please don't just. I've seen many people indiscriminately putting their published versions. I don't even know whether that's allowed or not, but it depends. Likewise, Semantic Scholars is another one. And then, of course, here in sharing network side, you also have sites like Sci-Hub. And what this Sci-Hub does is it uses university networks for, to take the subscription based this thing. So universities often subscribe to journals and all. So what happens is it somehow bypasses the university's security, and it's sort of takes the manuscripts and then offloads it onto its own database. And I am told that this is actually illegal. Basically, it's a dodgy network. You have already 81.6 million scholarly articles registered with Crossref, and 85.1% of articles published in toll access journals. All these can be accessed on Sci-Hub. Now, I'm not asking you to go and raid this site, but these are all dodgy sites. This is what some people call the dark web, but in general, make sure that the website you go to is a legal one as far as possible. Otherwise, your personal details can also be very easily stolen. That will be put you in very difficult position these days. So how do you find repositories? Well, there are various repositories. You have the Open Door, which is the directory of open access repositories. Okay, so and this is the web link. Then you have Open Access Directory, which actually gives you all journals and books which are available open access. Google Scholar, I'm sure you all know. So these are some of the open repositories. 1 minute. Yeah. And then, of course, the publishers they also have their own self-archiving policies. So if you go to a publisher's website and look at publisher's agreement, there are many publishers who have been in the business for a very long time. So if you look at papers which have been published in the 1970s, 80s, 1990s, those papers are probably, the publisher might have made them available open access. Some people call that as the bronze open access. But publisher's website also may contain many, many open access articles. Then you have a summary of database of all the journals, and that's called the Sherpa Romeo. And there is also another website which is called howcanishareit.com. So you will get information on where to share open access. Yeah. Sorry. So how do you find find publishers for open access articles? Well, journal websites, they are generally very reliable. They tell you how I mean, please note that when you submit an article to a journal, unless the journal is an open access journal, you have the choice whether to publish it open access or not. And then when you submit the article, at that stage, most good journals do not ask you how you want to publish it, because they do not want the peer review process to be influenced by how you are going to publish so how the paper will be published is completely blind to the peer review. The peer review has to be blind to that, in fact, the other way around. So that's the first thing. Once the paper goes through the peer review, then you have your access, your options and other things. So that's the normal way publishers do. Now, please note that it is also, just as you can publish open access in open access journals, very, very broadly, I just forgot to mention one. When you talk about open access journal, please note there are different types of journals. The whole journal may be open access. That is one possibility. Then there are what we call hybrid journals. Hybrid journals means they leave it to the authors, and the authors can either publish their article open access, or they can publish it through the normal subscription route. So they are called hybrid journals. To a very large extent, some of the old journals are hybrid journals. In the case of hybrid journals, there is always a criticism of publishers, because the publishers usually publish the subscription fee. And now, when the subscription fee is published, and then you have open access articles in that issue, then you see, mind you, some of the articles the payment has already been made. So why are they charging the authors twice? And that is what is called double dipping in the business. And so many publishers are now very, very clear that they don't do double dipping. They are also they try to be as transparent as possible about the subscription cost for a journal, which takes into account how many articles have been published open access. So anyway, that's for open access journals. Now, you can also publish books open access, and there are many, many publisher websites. You can see the university presses, University of Oxford, University of Cambridge, all these university publishers, their websites talk about open access book. If you look at the cost of publishing an open access article may be somewhere in the region of $2,500 to $3,000. But if you are talking about open access books, they are much more expensive. It will cost somewhere in the region of, well, $10,000 to $15,000, depending on how whether it's how big the book is, and how many figures, tables it has, and those sorts of things. But it can cost anywhere between $10,000 and $15,000. So there is also, so you can find open access books. You can either find them on publisher websites, or there is also a website called the Open Access Books Toolkit. Then you have the directory of open access books, and then there are also other platforms for open access. So these are all some of the links that you can click on to find where and how you can publish open access books. Now, in general, this slide is perhaps more useful to a PhD student or a young researcher. And how do you publish? How do you choose a publisher? And the general recommendation is to choose a reputable publisher. But when I say reputable, that's often misunderstood. Reputable means publishers who have been in the business for a reasonable length of time. And when you are looking at different journals and different publishers, please ask yourself the question, would you read it? Would you read a paper published in this journal? That's the first question you should ask. If you yourself won't read it, and if you consider the place pretty dodgy, then why do you want to publish it? Then, has anyone published in it? That's a good way of checking. Is it clear who the publishers are, and are the contact details clear? Now, here you have to be very careful. What has happened over the years is that See, nowadays publishing is not, desktop publishing is fairly straightforward. Electronic publishing doesn't require a big investment. In olden days, yeah, if you had to be a publisher, you had to start. I mean, it was a big company, it was a big enterprise, there was a capital investment, and it is only people who had the who were basically decent enough and who wanted to do the business, they started the business. Today, that's not the case, because anyone with a reasonably powerful desktop computer can start a publishing thing from your own backyard. And when you do that, and what they are also doing is just to fool people, they are actually developing front end of their desktop publishing to look similar to established websites. So when you click on their link, it looks as if it is a very well established journal. So you have got to be very careful here, and please use your own discrimination and make sure that the publisher, who the publishers are, you have the contact details, and that's very clear. It's not some sort of dodgy emails website. It's not some dodgy email address that's given there. And then you should also find out what type of peer review is used. And a very good check for authenticity of a journal is to look at the editorial advisory board. See whether you recognize those names. See whether they are the names that you have cited in your own article, because that's an easy way of checking the authenticity of the publisher. Then, if it is open access publishing, you will be charged. It's called the APC, article processing charge. And then, are those charges transparent? It's not somebody sort of says, as soon as you submit your manuscript, they'll say, give me the money, and then vanish. That is happening, let me tell you. So please be very careful here. And then, last but not the least, we live in a world of bibliometrics. So you should be able to check whether this journal is listed, whether it is indexed, etc. Okay, so these are the checks that you've got to do. Now, what are the key open access policies? Now, I will start with UK, and I'll also look at other countries. Okay, so with UK, you will see that we have two very broadly open access policies. One is, of course, the open access policies of the Research Excellence Framework. What is Research Excellence Framework? All universities in UK have to sort of submit their research returns depending on the subject areas, of course. So you have to, we are then, our research is assessed. So every faculty member on an average has to publish about, they are only looking for 4 or 5 publications in 6 years. It's not a big number. So numbers, we are not playing the numbers game here in UK. Even if they are looking at quality, and if the quality is good, then only it's accepted. So it's the number has been completely removed, and therefore citations, bibliometrics, their effects has been substantially are substantially lower in the Research Excellence Framework. So there, each university submits its returns. It could be research paper, it should be funding, it could be other measures of research impact. All these things are taken into account, and then the Research Excellence Framework gives you a score, and that score is used for subsequent funding, etc. And then you also have open access policies for Research Council UK, and according to, all research councils come under one umbrella in UK. It's called UKRI, UK Research and Innovation, or something like that. And all the requirement is, if I get a grant from UKRI, I am obliged to publish the outcome in open access. There is no option there at all. It's a contractual obligation. So the research grant often includes the article processing charges. So these are the two. Now, Research Excellence Framework, incidentally, does not consider any article that is not open access. So when I say I have to give 6 papers, those 6 papers have to be open access, and that is why we have our own repository, where I put the publisher's version may not be there, but the accepted version is there, so that can be reviewed and assessed. Then you also have what's called, there are different as I said, models that one uses for this, for open access. So there is also one which is called Plan S, and that is supported by a group called Coalition S, which is an international consortium of research funders. So all the research funding agencies, they have come together because, mind you, all research funding agencies are essentially agencies of the government, and government gives them the money. The government gets money through taxes. So that's the chain of events, and therefore, there is an attempt now to form a consortium and then deal with publishers, so that this whole idea of charges and other things can be made fair. Mind you, nobody says that article processing charge is unfair. It costs to publish an article. The question is not about the cost of publishing. The question is who pays for it. That's the key question. Up till now, it's the end user who has paid for it. That's been deemed to be unfair, and therefore, who else can pay for it? And that's where we have this open access argument. So with effect from 2021, all scholarly publications on the results from research funded by public or private grants provided by national, regional, and international research councils and funding bodies must be published. Please note, it's not just published in open access. Now they are saying you should publish in open access journals. That means the whole journal must be open access. It should not be hybrid. This has really sort of sent a scare through the publishers. And what publishers have now done is, because there have been many publications which have been operating for many years, well established, good journals, high standard journals, but then they were doing hybrid. Now when they became hybrid, initially they thought, since we are anyway offering open access, people should publish. But now it says you don't have to. It should not be a hybrid journal. It should be an open access. That means the whole journal must be open access. And that is where the movement is happening now. And this is the reason why publishers are responding in all kinds of ways. Some publishers are, I'll come to that in a minute. Some publishers are coming up with, say, for example, Chem in Science is a very well-established journal. So you can have a chemical engineering science X, chemical engineering science Y, and chemical engineering science Z. So they make use of chemical engineering science, but Chem in Science X, Y, and Z may be open access, whereas chemical engineering science is the traditional journal, and that may be. So the advantage is, even for the open access, they can then make use of the same bibliometrics as for chemical engineering science. So there are all kinds of games which are being played by publishers now. I'll come to some of these later on in the talk. I mentioned earlier that when you're reusing the open access articles, there should be a clear agreement between how the article or the research output can be reused. There is a series of agreements which is called the Creative Commons licenses, the CC license. I'm not going to go through all the CCs, okay? So that will take a lot of time. We don't have to worry about it. But almost all the research funders and universities prefer what's called the CC-BY license. And what the CC-BY license is, it allows reusers to distribute, to remix, to adapt, and build upon any material in any medium or any format, provided, of course, again, that's an important thing, proper attribution is made to the creator. You cannot ignore the creator. That will be unethical and unfair also. Then there are variants of CC-BY. I'm not going to go through that, but these are things that we often discuss in workshops and all. Now, when I was preparing for this talk, I thought, let me go and check what is the open access policy in Sri Lanka. So I looked for government policies, but I must admit I could not find one. I'm not saying that the government doesn't have a policy. It's just that I couldn't find one. So it may be more my inadequacy rather than the government's inadequacy. However, I did find quite a few references of papers on open access written which have been published from Sri Lanka. So I've only taken two, and I'm not saying that these are the two best. They are just relatively recent. That's the only reason why I've listed them. And you will see that there is an article in 2019 Journal of Educational Media and Library Sciences. Generally, what I have found is in Sri Lanka, it's the librarians who are interested in this area, and they have actually reviewed open access publishing in Sri Lanka. In fact, in this article, I've gone through it, and it's not just in Sri Lanka. They are also talking about South Asian countries and what is the take-up of open access in South Asian countries, etc. So this is, it's a good article for you to read and get an idea of what's the state of play as far as open access is concerned in Sri Lanka. So why is open access important? Now, it's very important to you as a researcher because it gives access to this, to what others have done. Is that clear? So from a researcher's point of view, there is no doubt. Remember, for writing one paper, you may look at it, you may say, I am paying article processing charge. But to write one paper, remember, you read at least 50 papers, probably 100 papers. So don't forget that you have, if those 50, 100 papers were not open access, you would be paying even to read them. So as a researcher, open access is extremely important. For businesses, it's very important. Businesses don't subscribe to journals. There are so many companies who want to access. They have to go to the university, and then the university either charges them or whatever, and it's anyway very extremely cumbersome. So why can't businesses also access research, which is already published and available in the open domain? From funders and sponsors, it's very, very useful because, in every research article, the funders and sponsors are named, so they get their publicity, and at the same time, they know what has happened with their money. So it's, again, open access is very important, and they also know what is the impact of their funding. So because depending on how many people in different parts of the world have accessed the research, they will know that their funding has made an impact. And then, of course, the general public, I mentioned about general public. Don't forget that more than 90% of the research is funded by governments. And governments get their money through taxpayers. So if you write a paper, and remember, your neighbor has actually sponsored your paper indirectly. Your neighbor has paid tax. Your neighbor you may be a chemical engineer, your neighbor may not be a chemical engineer. However, his or her taxes have sponsored your research. Now, why should he or she again pay to read your paper? And that is unfair in my view, and it is extremely unfair in my view. So these are some of the benefits of open access. The other advantage, now there is a lot that is happening now, and this research was not very clear till the 2015 and 2016. At that stage, we were not sure what is the effect of open access on citations. But today, it is extremely well established that citations and impact of open access articles are clearly, much more than for subscription-based articles. So that's one of the biggest incentives that you should have to publish open access, because the reach is much further. It goes much further. More people are able to read it. The citations are also higher, and that's almost conclusively established now. Now, in our university, when I say the university's open access policy, I'm referring to Reading here, and you will see that I'm required to upload the author final manuscript. So this is not the publisher's manuscript, it's the accepted version of the Word document or whatever, PDF or whatever, it doesn't matter. So that has to be uploaded on Centaur, which is the university's repository. Incidentally, if there is any paper that is published from Reading University or any of the UK universities, and let's say you hit a paywall, you can always go to the university's Centaur website and you can download it free. Is that clear? So that's an easy way of getting around a paywall. It's the same article. Then all universities' articles have to be published open access. It's either green open access or gold open access. And then, of course, we have to comply with open access conditions when we get funded, because it depends on the funding agency. All the research councils in UK insist on publishing in open access journal. If I don't publish it in open access journal, then I'm in breach of contract. So that's a serious situation. Now, around 30% of all global research articles are now published open access. So it's still 70% is hiding behind paywalls. Please, it's not. We are still not there. Even though I've talked so much about open access, don't think that we've already gone open access. It's around 30% of all global research is now published open access. UK expects to be on track for 90% open access within a year of publication. Of course, it depends on when you make the whole thing open access. So our ambition is to make 90% open access within a year of publication. That's how we have sort of set ourselves an ambition. Over 50% of Reading University journal outputs are now published open access. So that remember, it also enhances the reach and impact of your research. So that's a very important point. Now, how to achieve open access at Reading? Now, I don't want to go through all the details here, but there are two things that we have done. One is, before I send a manuscript for publication, I have to get an approval from the university to say that there is money to publish it open access. That's one way. But now what has happened is we have all UK universities have formed a consortium, and they have already made deals with all the leading publishers, Elsevier, Springer, the major publishers. So if I send my paper to an Elsevier journal, I don't think they won't come back and say, will you pay? Or so long as they know my affiliation and my email address, that's good enough, and it gets published open access. And that's because the university and the publisher already have an agreement in place. I'm not going to go through this because for lack of time, but what I'm going to talk about is some of the publisher deals. See, the library has lots of transformative agreements. So you please note how we save the money here. Don't think we are spending. The university may be spending money through article processing charge, but don't forget that the library budget is coming down because they don't have to buy the journal. Is that clear? So you will see that there is don't look at only one side of this open access, because you say, I'm an author, I pay money. But it's not that. Don't forget that there is another side to it where people are reading your articles and they are free. And you yourself are a reader. You wouldn't be able to write an article if you don't read articles. Now coming to theses. Again, all theses in UK and USA and Europe now, to the best of my knowledge, are open access theses. So that means we have to deposit open access. Anybody, anywhere in the world can access your whole thesis. In fact, data and other things are also put supplementary nowadays. Even data has to be recorded. So you can have all the details that you want. In fact, you end up having more details than what is necessary, but clearly the details are available. So open access visibility and discoverability is very high. The benefits of open access thesis is that it helps the author of the thesis. You know, if a thesis from Moratoa is open access and there is a company somewhere in Europe who can access that thesis, and they say, oh, this guy is or this girl is seems to be a fine researcher, you know, it generally enhances career prospects. At the same time, the funders and sponsors are also very happy about it. And clearly, yes, I mean, there is an issue of archiving, but that you have to really provide for archiving. If the university can't provide for archiving, I mean, we have to, there is no other choice. And these days, there are so many ways of archiving in the clouds and this and that, and they're not that expensive at all. When it comes to archiving, the archiving is expensive, but not as expensive as buying books and subscribing to journals. Some recent trends in technology engineering. Okay, so hybrid journals have been around for a while to support open access as well as subscription-based publishing. But you see, both European Union, UK, as well as US journals, I mean, US governments are very, very clear that the journal must be open access, not just the article must be published open access. So this is something that a number of journals, established journals, are also becoming open access. Then places like Africa, China, India, Latin American countries, what is happening there is they say they are committed to open access, but they are not resourcing their stated policy. See, you can't have a policy and not resource it. But at the moment, in many countries, you find that their policy is, yes, we favor open access, we want open access. But then the models of funding don't allow open access. And that's the problem which has to be solved. And I think Chile has recently come up with a very comprehensive policy that I'm aware of, and they've also resourced their policy. So it's not just making a grand statement. You make a statement and say, this is how I'm going to fund it and support it. There are many publishers who have come up with mirror journals. I mentioned about this. Food chemistry is a good example. Food chemistry is a very old journal. It was a hybrid journal. But then when the government said, no, we don't want hybrid journals, we are only going to publish in fully open access journals, they started coming up with Food Chemistry X, Food Chemistry Y, and so that the brand name was also there, and at the same time they could call it an open access journal. So these are some of the tricks that publishers are playing at the moment. More recently, what is happening is that the trend has been to brand journals based on the learned society which founded the journal. Please don't forget that most of the journals historically were started by learned societies, like the Institution of Chemical Engineers or the Society of Chemical Industry or whatever. I'm sure in Sri Lanka, the Institute of Engineers may have its own journal. So traditionally, the learned societies have started their journals. So what is happening is they are now branding the journals in the name of the, either in the name of the publishers or in the name of the institution that's published it. So these are so there is a lot of changes that is happening here because governments are insisting on open access and they are actually supporting open access. Open access, in my view, is a very, very fair system, but it must be resourced, it must be properly supported. I think that's all I wanted to say. I would be very happy to answer questions. I don't know how I have done for time, but Ajit, I leave it to you. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, Niranjan. You're just on, we are hitting 5:30 in Sri Lanka.
Oh, is it? Oh, wow.
Oh, okay. 6:30. Oh, sorry, wow. 6:30 in Sri Lanka. Yeah, we can take on a couple of questions. Just to start,
are the questions on the chat box, or are they?
Anyone who can put on chat as well, yes.
Yeah.
But I'll just ask it. That is, what you said about something about the universities now having agreements with, let's say, like Elsevier or what?
So
what exactly does that mean?
Okay. So in it's not just one university, because see, all research intensive universities have to publish, and most of if you see the biggest publisher, say let's say science and technology, the biggest publisher is Elsevier. No, regardless of what your views are on Elsevier, is a different matter, and I'm not going to go down. I'm not going to worry about that. But Elsevier is the biggest publisher as far as science and technology and medical area and are all concerned. Now, so what universities have done is they have formed a consortium. They have an agreement with Elsevier. So there is a payment that is made through the consortium to have open access publication without. So the article processing charge is actually not. It's not. So I don't have to worry about it. Okay. It's a bit like a national health service. You don't pay at the point of service delivery. But there is a money exchange that has gone on between the universities, and that's a fair agreement between a consortium of universities and the publisher. So they don't mind, so long as all they check is whether the paper is from Reading University or not, or whether the paper is from Cambridge University or not. That's all they are checking. And once it is there, they just publish it open access. The money flows. God knows from where, but it flows. So that's the type of agreement they have reached. So a consortium of universities with big publishers. Now, it's not all publishers, but it's only big publishers like Elsevier, Springer, and there may be others also, I don't know.
Okay, we have one question in the chat, Bhanuka, and then also we have another question, hands raised by Professor Udayangani.
1 minute. I'm on the chat box now.
Okay, you can answer in the chat.
So it says, how supportive, this is the question from Bhanuka. How supportive is the Sri Lankan research ecosystem for open access publishing? Since most research, especially done by young researchers, are self-funded. Very difficult for me to answer this question in any convincing way. If you are a self-funded researcher, now this word self-funded research is a bit dodgy. What does self-funded mean? You're not paying a fee to the university, or your family is paying or you and your family are paying a fee to the university. Let me tell you, you may not be. There are many. This self-funding means you may be supporting yourself, but that's still a part of the funding. It's not the total cost of your education. So self-funded is usually partly self-funded, not fully self-funded. Regardless, let's put that to one side. Even if you are self-funded, if you can afford the article processing charge, publish it open access. If you can get a sponsor to give you the money for publishing open access, publish it that way. That's the point I'm trying to make. Now, I don't know, whether the Sri Lankan system is supportive. Now, this depends on, I'm really not an authority on Sri Lankan system. But clearly, in principle, I don't see why any society should be against open access when it is giving free access to everybody to read your paper. I agree. Who pays the money is a different matter altogether. But in principle, why should you be against? So I would expect the Sri Lankan research ecosystem to be benevolent. To what extent it is benevolent is for people like Ajit and others to comment on, and I'm no expert on it. Okay, so that's one question. Then there is also, there is from Gayatri too. It says, in hybrid journals, if we choose, we have funds for publication process in the submission portal, will there be a bigger chance of accepting our paper? Now, I have to make this very clear. I have edited journals for a number of years, and yes, I have edited an Elsevier journal from 2005 to 2019. So it's a fairly long time. 15 years is a long time. And I think, let me tell you, editing a journal for more than 15 years is tiring. So I won't recommend that to anybody. But the peer review process is blind to how you're going to publish it. In fact, as a part of the peer review process, I wouldn't even know. Even if you have ticked the open access box, I wouldn't even know that. And I wouldn't care about it also. So all reputed journals, they make sure that the peer review process is completely independent of how you want to publish it. So it doesn't, this whole idea that if you publish open access, your chances of acceptance are higher is complete rubbish in reputed journals. If there are dodgy journals doing that, I don't know. That will be my answer to your question. So those were the two questions, Ajit. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, Professor Udayangani.
Yes, sir. I think my question is more similar to Bhanuka's question, and it may be not to Professor Niranjan, but maybe maybe to the management. The question is because of the open access policy, and since we cannot afford to pay the article publishing charges, now we are not in a position to submit our publications to most of the journals. And I have experienced this one recently. Even there were many relevant special issue calls, but since we cannot afford the charges, we are not in a position to submit our papers.
I'm not entirely sure about this. See, if you look at, I mean, the slide where I showed you, even today, 70% of the publications are not open access. So I don't think, I mean, you may not be able to submit to an open access journal. That I agree.
Yeah.
But you can't publish a paper is a bit of an exaggeration.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I'm not saying that we cannot publish, but I mean, there were very interesting special issue calls that
well,
we
there are
published.
There are many journals, all the established journals. I mean, for example, I don't know. Common Science is a good example. You just send a paper to Common Science, and I mean, you know, it goes through the peer review. If it is good enough, it gets accepted. Yes, you didn't have the money to pay open access, but that doesn't matter. Still, it is accepted. It's probably in the subscription part, and it will. In fact, there are many articles. If the article is good, if they think it can be cited. See, don't forget that publishers are also very much interested in bibliometrics. So what happens is the publisher, if they think that this is a good article, they may even publish it open access. They may not even charge you. So I don't think the fact that you don't have an article processing charge disadvantages you from publishing. It doesn't disadvantage you from publishing in a reputed journal. It may disadvantage you from publishing it in an open access journal. That's all.
Yeah, agree. Yes. So just to ask from Ajit sir, is there any possibility that I mean within the university we can get some support for publication processing charges?
Well, you know, the interesting answer is it goes through approved, right? The only thing is there may be a light delay in, but if there is a large amount of, I mean, like significant, that is the issue. But apparently at the moment, no request is rejected. I think
Okay.
that's the way it is being communicated. But whether you get the money and all that immediately so you can proceed towards the journal, that's a little bit of an issue maybe.
No, but I think what is important is I don't think anybody has been stopped from publishing in a good journal because they didn't have the money. It's not happening. I mean, you know, you please, I think send it to any journal. Tell them that we don't have open access. We can't pay open access, and you will see there are so many options available. A good paper, a good research. It would be a shame if good research doesn't get published.
Well, what you're saying, Niranjan, in one way is that there should not be never a communication to the sub-researcher or the writer, the mode of publication when you submit something, right?
No, there is not. If you submit it, yeah. If you submit it,
Dangan is raising is that she has that. I mean, they have seen that issue.
Yes, and now say for example, they gave certain options, a 50% discount, but still we are not in a position to afford that. Yeah,
I agree. As I said, open access costs are going up also. Today it is around $2,500 to $3,000 depending on the journal. But I have a sneaking suspicion in the next couple of years it may be approaching 5,000. That is the tragedy. But having said that, don't forget that to write one paper, you have to read 50 papers. And those 50 papers, if you had to pay for it, you can see how much you would have spent.
But when you say 2,500, it sends shivers down our spine.
No, I'm not denying that, but all I'm trying to say, but that's the cost of publication. It's the cost of publication because somebody has to pay somewhere. Publication is not free. That's the point. So, but as I said, you know, if you please send it to journal, there are many, 70% of the research even today is not open access. So obviously the people are publishing. It may constrain the reach of your article, it may constrain the impact of your article, but it should not stop you from publishing. That's the point I'm making.
I think, Udayangani, you still have the question, right?
Yes, of course.
Right. Do you have any other question? Okay, I think, yes, I think you have taken us in a complete tour on the open access publishing parts and given us some very important points, and also some for the universities as well to have repositories,
Yeah.
right? And I don't think we are real down on that lane either for the moment.
But you can always create your own virtual repository.
No, we do have. I mean, like
Yeah.
Moratua, we do have.
Yeah,
Dr.
that's not too.
Naini
It's
can
not too
answer.
expensive.
Dr.
Yeah.
Naini.
Yeah.
Dr. Naini, you are here, right?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. It's a very important session. And also then as a library, we have provided many open access for our staff members and students. There are many open access journals and the things you have discussed here. But here there are many new things. So thank you so much, sir.
So our thesis also, we have put it on the open access, of course, subjected to the supervisors or the giving approval. Otherwise, subsequent to the permission, you can have access to the thesis. The abstracts are all open and online.
Yeah. No, I mean now they are going sort of complete. I mean everything, including data, lab notebooks, everything. It's open.
Okay, but then certain segments of the thesis still can be redacted, right?
Oh yeah, you can always do that because see, for example, if there are commercial sponsors of PhD work, I mean they can have an embargo. For example, we have a number of agreements with companies where the PhD thesis cannot be published for 5 years after the submission. Then there are, so these are all individual cases, you know.
Okay.
If
So
when
ours
we
is about 3 years.
publish a paper, if there is, you know, it usually has to be approved by the company because they don't want any commercial sort of, you know, commercially sensitive information to be leaked out to the in the general media. So you know, we follow all the agreement protocols. There is no, I mean, nothing stops you from having embargoes, and there is nothing immoral about having an embargo. The question is very simple. Have an embargo if there is a good reason. The default must be open.
Right. Right. I think with that, I think it's time to say a very big thank you, President Niranjan, from joining us from UK and educating us on this whole process and sharing your thoughts. And for those all who joined as well, really a big thank you as well. And hope we had an interesting
Ajit, I forgot to mention one very important thing, and that was at the very first slide. I wanted to start with that, but somehow it got. There is a co-author for this presentation, and that is Alison Sutton. Alison Sutton is our representative in the library, and she has helped me with a lot of links. So she is also an author of this presentation. Okay. Oh, terribly sorry that I didn't mention.
We noted the name. Thank you. It's taken.
Yeah.
And by the way, this is recorded, so it will go on our university site, our site, and later on, so it's available to all the others. So thank you very much, President Niranjan, for enlightening us, and so we can bring the 7th Lighthouse to an end.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.